Good morning, TTRA. Woo! Better. So thank you all for coming to the next session on international travel. Today, you get the great benefit of some insider information that isn't even public yet. So everyone, get excited. I make David Huther very, very nervous. Can we have our slides up, please? So good morning, everyone. My name is David Reichbach. I'm the Senior Director of Analytics and Data Security for Destination Analysts. Welcome to our panel on international travel for TTRA's Marketing Outlook Forum, February 2023. I am joined today by David Huther, the Deputy Director of Research, National Travel and Tourism Office, U.S. Department of Commerce, and Rosina Barbastefano, which I am pronouncing correctly, nice. Senior Director of Analytics, Research and Analytics for Brand USA. We are going to share a number of very interesting insights when it comes to international travel today. You're going to be hearing the not yet public NTTO volume estimate and forecast. And then you'll hear the Brand USA perspective as well on how Brand USA is currently viewing international travel inbound. So, our agenda for today. We're first going to take a look at 2022 international travel, our year in review. We're then going to focus on 2023 and beyond, forecasts and predictions, and then discussion topics. And we have a number of different discussion topics which we felt were the top issues and challenges to consider. When we get to the discussion topics, we definitely want to open it up to audience questions and insights. We really want it to be more of a discussion at that point. So we'll start with current state of international travel, 2022 year in review, and I will turn it over to David Huther.
Great. Thank you very much, David. First of all, can I see a raise of hands of who is not familiar with the National Travel and Tourism Office?
There you go.
Nice. Okay, that's great.
Only new ones.
So, but before I start, I will let you know that one of the things, I took the job right when the pandemic hit. And our forecaster at the time, Mark Brown, said when we were in 2021, he was like in 2020, he was like, you know, we probably shouldn't do a forecast right now because we don't know what's happening. And so I said, great, so let's pause. So about a little more than a year ago, the Biden administration finally lifted the bans on international travel and the restrictions. So we saw international travel start to come back. And we said, okay, now it's time to go. Now, as many of you know, Mark Brown recently retired at the end of December. But before he did, I said, in the fall, we're going to do a forecast. And so he corralled the gang together, and so we worked on that in the September time frame. I was going to release the forecast to you all today, but since we hadn't done it in a few years, the Secretary of Commerce wants to do a press release. So the official data is not going to be on our website probably for a week, but I'm going to give you the highlights. The other thing I'll let you know is that the National Travel and Tourism Office has been working fairly diligently to expand our product and make it more useful to states and destinations. One of the things we've done is we worked with our contractor CIC Research to develop new methodologies where when I came on board, we were reporting state visitation to like maybe 20, 25 states and maybe 40 destinations. And we've now expanded that to up to 49 states and more than 90 destinations. Another thing we've been doing is this year we've been working with another partner, Exporter Canada. And as you know, that there's been a dearth of information related to Canada land travel. And we're going to be reversing that. And starting this year, we're going to be reporting on the characteristics of Canadian land travel to the United States. And since the stage of international travel is really changing so much, another thing that you can look forward to is in the past, when we would produce characteristic data of international travelers, we would do it on an annual basis, which we're going to continue to do. But starting this year, we're going to start reporting this information on a quarterly basis. So we can provide more detailed information about the characteristics of international travelers, where are they going to you, on an ongoing real-time basis. So that's some of the work that we've been doing and recently, and I'll get into some more things later. So we can hit the next slide. So here's international arrivals, the data that we produce related to international visitation in the United States. This is all visitations through October. And what we've seen is that over the past year, international visitation is up about 61%. Spending by international visitors is up close to 80%. Now, we all know that's coming from a very low base a year ago, but we know that they opened up the spigot in November of last year. But just for perspective, in the 12 months ending in November, drive travel is volume's up about 0.5%. Hotel room demand is up about 4%. TSA throughput, general travel spending as well, is up about 12%. So the takeaway here is, for the past couple of years, international travel was a drag. And it's turning now into a driver. And it's going to be in the future as well. Awesome. So if we look at the current state of international visitation, this is the 18 countries that we forecast international travel for going forward. And this is where they are in December. And the guys on the left-hand side is Canada and Mexico. That's only October. But you see, we break it down right now between the blue guys is Europe, the purple guys is South America, and the red is Asia. And so what you can see is overall visitation in December is about 71–72% of pre-pandemic levels. So December 22 compared to December 2019. And you see most of the Europeans, the big markets, are a little overperforming that. The South American markets are pretty close to that. But then look at Asia. And outside of India and Australia, if you look at Taiwan, South Korea, China, Japan, as you all know, they are underperforming. And so when we are looking at our forecast going forward, one of the things that we took a look at is, well, kind of what's the state of the first year and who's growing? And then looking at other variables going forward. So the data that I'm going to show you later, instead of percent change and things of that nature, where it's 2,000%, 500%, et cetera, most of the data I'm going to share you is everything compared to 2019 levels. So we're at a state now where a lot of the major markets are, if they're not back, they've made significant inroads over the last 12 months.
Awesome. So I thought at this point it would be an interesting research exercise for us to compare some data points. As we know, behavioral data and sentiment data don't always align. What someone says they're likely to do doesn't always match up with what they actually do. But I wanted to do an exercise comparing some data from our State of the International Traveler Sentiment Tracker to see how close we could get to predicting these top markets coming back. And so I took the list here. If you can see the black line on David Huther's slide here, any of the countries that are above the black line are kind of above average for that grouping. So, and by the way, this is all a premise of one of the first questions that Rosina had asked, that, this is a question that she thinks the audience is really going to want to talk about. So we're spending time with it. But compared to the pre-pandemic, who are the biggest winners, biggest growth markets? And so I listed them out. As you saw on the previous slide, for North America, it's Canada. For Europe, it's Spain, Ireland, Italy, UK, France, and Germany. For South America, it's Colombia and Argentina. And for Asia, it was only India that was above the line. So now let's compare this list to our sentiment tracker. This data comes, again, from State of the International Traveler. It's our annual online tracking survey of the top 15 feeder markets to the United States. We actually don't have all of the ones that you track, so there are going to be a couple of question marks on my slide where I can't say whether sentiment confirms or denies. But just in the last year's collection alone, we had over 12,000 surveys. Our markets of study are on screen now, and they largely overlap with just a couple of missing ones. So in order to pick a metric from sentiment that I was going to compare to the actual volume numbers, I chose the likelihood to travel internationally this year. So we asked each respondent in their respective country, in their respective native language, how likely are you to travel outside your home country this year? Currently, all countries combined, 75% of international travelers globally for our purposes, say that they're likely to travel this year. And when we look at the trends by country, the very closely aligning with what David Huther had shown, the countries that really showing negative trends, Australia, South Korea, and China. The countries that are showing positive trend, Canada in the North American market, France, Germany, and the United Kingdom from the European market, as well as Italy, and then India and Colombia really seeing strong positive growth just in the last year. We also, just for comparison, wanted to throw in international spending expectation this year. And similar trends, Australia and South Korea really showing negative trend, France, Germany, Italy, Canada, and the Netherlands showing positive trend. So if I go back to that slide where I'd listed out all the countries from the NTTO volume estimate, where they are showing the biggest return, I'm now going to add in the sentiment, confirm or not. We don't track Spain or Ireland yet, but I will definitely be putting that forth for our future collection. But almost every other country that actually showed positive return, we probably could have predicted with some measure of accuracy just using sentiment. The only one that I really felt was an interesting divergence was the Netherlands in Europe. Definitely not showing the same volume growth that we see in their sentiment. And remember that the question is, how likely are you to travel outside your home country? And we see that very, very high in our sentiment tracker. So really the question is, where are they traveling instead if it's not here?
It's European.
I know, gasp. But let me turn it over to Rosina for the Brand USA perspective.
I don't have official numbers. I rely on NTTO and tourism economics to give me that perspective. And we certainly saw and cheered 2022 like booming of travel. But even though I'm a half full glass person, I always take things with some precautions. And I always go back and say, did it grow like really to where it was? And for me, it's still, even though 2019 was not the best year of international travel for the United States, for me, it's still a baseline. I don't like to see things compared to 2021 or 20, where, as David just mentioned, it's gonna be like exponential growth. And what caught my attention is that we're still 60%, around 60% of where we were in 2019. And when Brand USA looks even more beyond our borders, it was same. It was below the 60%. Obvious reasons, the Asian market is not there yet. But we did look at what the numbers were saying. And as you all know, I'm Colombian, so I was cheering for my Colombian people, which are still showing up. And for that reason, for example, Brand USA started advertising way more heavy in Colombia. We have a hyper-local social media presence in Colombia. That was not before the pandemic. And we started doing paid media to respond to certain markets like Colombia, where we felt we needed to be more proactive, even though they were already showing up. I think David at some point is going to show back, and when we were reviewing our slides, he said, what's going on with Colombia in 2021? 2021 for Colombia, for example, was all about vaccines. That's no secret to anyone in the market, and it was not the exception for other countries. When the United States started asking for the vaccine testing, or the vaccine actually to get to the United States, it started slowing the growth, or the pace started slowing it down. That doesn't mean that they're showing up. We're hitting, I think, as of now, 50% of all international travel to Colombia, it's from Colombia. It's actually ended up in the United States. But how much can we keep growing? That would be something different. And we're going to be talking about that when we look at 2023. Well.
Okay. So let's jump into our second talking point, which is international forecast for 2023 and beyond. And I will turn it back over to David Huther.
Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to look at the NTTO forecast and we're going to break it out in regions in terms of, we're going to look at North America, Europe, South America, and then Asia. And then we'll end up saying where we think everything's going to be in a few years from now. And the other thing I'll let you know is the information I'm sharing with you isn't public now. It will likely be public in about a week. And so I ask everyone to please subscribe to TI News, because we will announce that on our webpage and put it on the listserv as well. So expect all the numbers out in about a week or so. So we look at the outlook for Canada and Mexico, which we think is fairly bright, and we think that most of the recovery you saw in Canada has been very strong this year from a very low base in 2021. But then we think that in general, Mexico is going to get back to pre-pandemic levels about 2024. Canada soon thereafter in 2025, and these could be switched a little bit because you're talking about how strong the months are in the early versus the later. But fairly solid growth out into 2027. So the North American market looks pretty good. Especially, I think we're looking at that Mexico land is going to be particularly strong. So now, next one, please. So here is Europe, and the stars next to all those bars are where these countries are reaching pre-pandemic levels. And so we see for the major economies like UK, Germany, France, Italy, Spain, Netherlands, Ireland, it's mostly either a 2024, 2025 period of rebound. And again, some of these numbers are really close. So they could end up in 24, they could end up in 25. But it's kind of like a similar pattern to what we see in North America. But again, growing at a slower pace in the out years. And to be honest with you, for the next couple of years, say for 2023, 2024, the exchange rate, GDP growth, population, things of that nature that we typically use to do our forecast really are not the drivers. It's really just trying to anticipate how fast the rebound is going to be, because there's a lot of built-up demand that overwhelms your traditional factors such as GDP growth and population. But we see most of the visitation growing, fairly in a stronger position in the next couple of years, and then moderating a little bit in the out years. And then next slide for Central America, or South America, I should say. Again, Colombia was in great shape. We think Brazil is going to be able to take a little bit longer, and the Argentina we think is going to be growing, but we don't see Argentina getting back to the pre-pandemic levels anytime in our window. And I think the main thing there that's driving that is exchange rates. If the dollar remains strong, we've seen that Argentina has been affected pretty significantly with exchange rates. So growth there, but not back to pre-pandemic levels in the forecast outlook. Maybe by 2030 it'll be there. And then finally, arrivals from Asia, and I threw Australia in here. And what we expect is going to happen here is, while there's going to be growth in these markets, aside from India, the Asian markets we think are going to be underperforming. We think that the growth rate in China, right now we forecast that they will be back to 2019 levels in the last year of our forecast outlook. In 2027, they get back to 2019 levels. But we think that's not going to be the case for Japan or Taiwan. And some of that is population growth, et cetera. But the one thing that we've seen, and some of the survey data that we'll talk about probably explains that, is that the Asian markets are, I think, a little more risk averse. And they're risk averse for a number of reasons. It could be health, it could be areas like safety that we all know about. And it seems that those issues are impacting, and we think are going to be impacting travel in the United States, as well as currency rates if the dollar remains fairly strong. So a lot of the countries just say the United States is too expensive to go to. So the bottom line is that we still see a rebound in all the major source markets, but we do think that Asia is likely to be underperforming North America and Europe. And so the next slide is going to be kind of our overall outlook. So we think that the recovery is going to be, for international visitation, is going to get back to pre-pandemic levels overall in 2025. So, how do you all think that compares to the time period after 9/11? The answer is, it's pretty similar. It actually took, I looked at it this morning, so I was like, someone's going to ask me that maybe. It took 5 years for international travel to get back to 2000 levels after 9/11. And so right now, we're looking at 6 years. And then if we go to the level of where we're going to be in 2027, we think around 91 million. So that's the outlook. I think in general, I think it's fairly optimistic, but I think it's a little cautious. So there might be some upside risk. There is a lot of going on in terms of geopolitics that, especially in the next couple of years, could throw a lot of this stuff into a wrench, either on the upside or the downside. So we're going to have to monitor that very closely. The one thing I will let you know also, I'll give a plug for our office, is that when I first came to our office, on a monthly basis, we published international visitation for about 20 countries. So as an FYI, we now produce and make data available on a monthly basis for about 200 countries and areas of the world. So we are providing more data to everybody on a real-time basis. And the final plug is, if you really want to monitor your state and local area, we also now produce, free for the public, airline visitation data from not only the United States to every country in the world, but from every state to every city in the world, or every city in the United States to every city in the world, as well as from every airport in the United States to every international airport in the world on a monthly basis, and in fact on a daily basis that we update once a month. And we break that out between U.S. citizen travel and travel from non-U.S. citizens. So it's a great way for you to see how's international travel in and out of Houston, and you can find it out in about 2 minutes. So maybe we can do a webinar on TTRA about that. But we're trying to work and strive to provide more data that's actionable to the travel research community. And this is where it's going to be. So the forecast we're going to have, we actually changed this a little bit. In the middle there'll be an international travel bar, international forecast section. So when you go to the National Travel and Tourism Office, hit research, you come to a page like this. In the middle, they'll say International Visitation Forecast. Click on that, and we'll have the information for you there in a week.
Okay. So, I'm sorry, you can go back if you want to get the URL. We've now just heard the first official NTTO volume forecast since pre-pandemic. Big news. Let's try to answer the question, and I'm going to bring Rosina back in, predictions on markets, types of travelers that will bounce back from the Brand USA perspective.
Okay, before I talk about this amazing study that we did with Samari late last year, going back to your forecast, I know we're expecting it to come by 2026, 2027, but everyone here in this room is like spending and advertising for the next 6 months, for the next year. It's not just like, oh, we're gonna be fine in 2027. And that is where Brand USA takes a look. It's, we're now doing analysis of how much we should be spending. A lot of our spending was based on forecasts from tourism economics from summer of last year. And there was a little bit more optimism then than their last forecast from December. And we have to take notice of that. The expectation it was that in 2023, we were going to be seeing a little bit closer to where we were in 2019. That has gone down. From, I think, 80 to like 70% of total international. And when it comes to overseas, meaning taking Canada and Mexico out of the play for that reason, it's still 60%. And back then, during the summer, I think it was like 70%. It's going to be, what we're going to be seeing is, even though, David, you say GDP and economic factors might not play that much, but at the same time, we have to be cautious about it. The markets were, and you're going to be seeing on the other slides, inflation is still an important thing, not just within the US, but for other markets, and European markets are going to be the one hit, they're going to be hit the most. And for us, that is our core from the overseas markets. So those are the things that, even though we're expecting things to come back in 2027, for 2023, the pace, as you've heard before, it's going to be slower than what we would love to see, and we have to adjust to that. So going back to international travel and personas. I contacted Denise at Smart Insights with a very challenged work. We were trying to do some sort of benchmark to our advertising. We haven't done that in a very long time. And I said, I need to do more with this research. And I asked her to validate what I had inherited from a big study that Brand USA did before I became part of Brand USA about personas. And I wanted to see who really was the people that we should be talking, what were the expectations, and if our personas were still holding. And not necessarily for our surprise, those have changed since 2016. And what we came up, we're still debating on names. Denise, it was hilarious when she was presenting this to my team. She said, we're researchers, and we're going to put the names of the segments, but those are not necessarily marketing oriented. We're not marketers. We do research, and I follow into that category, Denise. But we're still using some of those names. And we came up with 5 personas: glamorous getaways, family time, outdoors enthusiast, culture requesters, and the excitement seekers. We then look at this and said, which markets from the ones we surveyed scored highest into these buckets? So for the glamorous getaways, we have Canada, Australia, Mexico, France, and Brazil. Family, Colombia, yes. Mexico, UK, Brazil, India, and Australia. Outdoors, Germany, which always, I don't know, they are very outdoor people, I guess. Keeps being pointed out in any type of research that we do. France, South Korea, the UK, Canada, and Australia. And then on the culture side, Germany, they tend to be older in terms of generation. We also look at that. Colombians, Brazil, South Korea, and France. And for the excitement, the only country that actually scored highest within their categories was India. And this is what we're using to start modeling, actually, our media and the type of travelers based on psychographics that we're going to be targeting in those particular markets.
Rosina, if I can add, just to validate some of these, we know from our annual sentiment tracker that German visitors to the United States absolutely report their love and passion for our national park system. We know that travelers from Colombia and Mexico, and honestly the rest of South America, love our theme and amusement parks. So family time is absolutely the category that I would put them in here. This is just anecdotal evidence that I'm remembering as you're walking through these. I'm like, yeah, that all sounds right.
It was interesting because what we do with this is survey-based, right? Mm-hmm. And from our agencies on the social media side and the digital side, we're like, okay, you're bringing us this feedback, and it actually aligns very much with what we found with the surveys. They name it a little bit different, but the categories are still holding for what we're seeing for our advertising.
So to give our destination analyst prediction on what markets are going to most desire coming to the United States in the future, I pulled another data point from our State of the International Traveler study, specifically our open-ended question of most desired international destinations. So we let travelers from every country that we survey write in the destinations that they most want to visit in the next 3 years. And if you look at the chart on the right, that very bold blue line, that's writing in the United States or any destination within the United States. Year over year, it is always about a third of all written in destinations are here, and it far outpaces writing in any other country or any other destination in any other country. If we looked at just last year's change to this year, United States was written in with a growth of about 7%, and our biggest growing competitor in terms of what other destinations global travelers are writing in, 59% growth in travelers writing in Mexico or a destination in Mexico. They're far down the list of top destinations, but seeing that growth is actually really important. For all of the countries that we survey, looking just at the change in the proportion of travelers who specifically write in the United States, I'm highlighting the countries that have double-digit growth of writing in the United States. And you'll notice the top three, Japan, South Korea, and China. We're also seeing France and Germany, who weren't writing us in as much previously as they are now. It is such a fascinating point, I think, that the Asian markets are currently forecasted to be the slowest to return. They're telling us in sentiment that they're least likely to, of all the countries, to travel outside their home country. And we think a lot of that is restrictions, and we think a lot of that is, as David Huther was saying, being risk averse. But in terms of where they'd love to go, if all of those other factors fell away, they're absolutely going to be clamoring to come back and visit us and spend. And we know that the Chinese visitor historically pre-pandemic had the highest spend of any visitor to the United States. So I will be very interested to see how the actual return plays out, and when those borders come down and when it becomes less risky for them to visit us, whether we'll see it come back in a much faster way than maybe we're currently predicting.
David,
Anyway.
Pointing out to that, if you use NTT tourism economics data, you see the United States is the #1 destination for the majority of those markets.
Yep.
So I tend to combine the sentiment and the data, and it aligns very much. Even though the international travel outside of their region, in the majority of the cases, is not necessarily big. So I do the exercise with tourism economics data, and I break it down into what I call long haul, which is, for example, for European markets going out of Europe. And then the rest of the world is us to conquer. It's interesting to see that when you start looking at that, that is how much we can influence or make that move. It's small in the majority of the markets. The United States, on average for those markets, it's only 15% of their overseas market. However, it's the #1.
Yep.
But it's a challenge for all of us to make a move on that needle.
So we're now going to jump into a couple of our discussion topics. I realize that because the last session went a little long, we're going to be short on time, but we're going to have some commentary on at least some of these. Our first discussion topic was going to be on impacts around inbound travel. And when I say impacts, I mean things that are really outside of our necessarily control as destination researchers or destination marketers: exchange rates, inflation, perceptions of safety. I wanted to provide one additional data point when we test top deterrents to visiting the United States, and I actually color-coded the top 4. The green ones are cost-related, the US being too expensive, and the orange ones are safety-related, specifically general personal safety and gun violence, which were big concerns. All of these top deterrents were top deterrents pre-pandemic, so these are not new issues by any means. but they are absolutely still top of mind for international travelers.
It's also, going back to that, we're starting using, YouGov data. And when we started looking at, during the pandemic, what were the top deterrents? Safety, being concerned about COVID. Now the line is shifting, and it's price. This is just a reference of how much price actually has gone up in a year. So it's comparing where they were in January of 22 compared to where we are in this month or past month. And it is still the #1 reason for them not to travel, but this is how much that delta, like between those two bars, is in the majority of those markets that we're talking.
The other thing I'd note is that if you look at travel inflation, because it's much more fuel intensive, if you go back and look at last year, the middle of last year when inflation was really surging, it was really surging in travel. I mean, it was times where inflation in travel on a year-over-year basis was up like 19, 18%. But it's come down rather significantly over the past 4 or 5 months. And so I think the one thing to keep in mind going forward is keep an eye on, on the pace of travel inflation. And remember, we listened to the United Airlines gentleman yesterday, and he was talking about, hey, these high air prices are something that's going to continue going forward. So I think it's important to look at those metrics and kind of keep an eye on them. So those things are going to be a deterrent to some possible travel to the United States, potentially.
This is what I was basing my 2023. There's no surprise that U.S., as we heard Adam early this week, about a mild recession. We're going to get over it. But it's not just the U.S. It's all those markets that we track. The European market is still going to be having that recession as well, probably hitting them harder, to the point that between when Tourism Economics was forecasting in summer, when we did our planning and our media for this year, it has dropped 10 points to where they were all at the end of December. So for us, that was like an eye-opening. Are we necessarily need to invest that much on those markets, or can we slow down the pace of our budgets? And that is something that we're considering. Inflation, it has gone a little bit better, but it's not like anywhere. The strength of the dollar, yes, the dollar has gone, lost a little bit of that power, but it's still extremely high. And for example, for the Latin American countries, with the strength of the dollar where it is and the euro where it is, Europe has become very competitive for them. It's not as expensive anymore. So, and then China, which is the hot topic of everyone here, we are expecting to come, but there's way too much uncertainty of when that is going to happen. We're expecting, everyone keeps saying it might be the second half of the year. Is it? We were talking about airlines, and I was looking at airline data, and for the first 3 months, we're still only 6% of the air capacity to the United States is still available. It's expecting to go to around 20% in the next 3 months. We'll see if that actually happens. And then USA visa wait times, it technically it's affecting first-timers, but even for the renewal of those, sending your passport has gone better, but it's not at the levels that we should be looking at, and that is going to be affecting and slowing the pace. We're not saying that it's not going to grow, it's just that the pace is going to be, and we'll have to be a little bit more patient with that.
Awesome. We are coming up to the end of our session. Our last discussion topic was going to be changes in the traveler landscape. We were going to talk a little bit about younger generations. We love that the session that preceded us was about generational travel, because great setup there. The millennials are the largest traveling population globally. They do not have the largest share of wealth, which is a great point. And international travel is expensive, but they are the largest actual volume of travelers. I love the discussion about Gen Z. I like to remind everyone that the oldest Gen Z travelers have just started being able to legally rent a car. So they are finally of the age, or will soon to be at the age, where they can make their own international traveler decisions, and Gen Z travel to the United States from abroad, I think, is going to be something that all of us will need to keep a very close eye on, because they will be different. The pandemic forced us to leap forward in technology and in resource uses globally, not just the United States. And I love a lot of the things that both Brand USA and all the destinations in this room are doing to make sure that we're speaking to the right generations on the right platforms. For inspiration and planning resources, I had just a couple points that I thought were really interesting because Colombia was at the top. They are currently our highest country reporting that they use travel agencies or tour operators traditionally for destination inspiration. But they're closely followed by Brazil, Argentina, Australia, and Mexico. And then just a point, because I think it's really important that we keep an eye on what we're putting out to the global market. Argentina, India, Colombia, and China lead the global countries who are looking at official destination marketing organization websites or state tourism websites. Brazil is leading in DMO social media official content, which I thought was an interesting one. There's plenty more detail like this that we could get into, but we don't really have a lot of time for that. Any questions from the audience? Because I want to make sure that we at least have some time, maybe one or two. National Travel and Tourism Office, David Huther. First volume forecast since the pandemic.
Thanks so much for the great insights. So I'm a European and I'm a German, so I can truly say I'm an outdoor enthusiast, and America has great outdoors. One question is on, you say that recovery from Europe is 2028 or even further out, or whatever we see with the clouds. So we have a war in the Ukraine going on as well. My question is, we see on Google that a lot of people are searching of destinations in the US. I mean, it seems like they're online, but we don't see the bookings, right? And we know the hurdles on it. But in your opinion, do you think, is there a chance that we see a faster recovery until 2028 for global recovery? And I know China plays in that as well. And what are the factors to have a little bit of a slightly faster recovery than we would anticipate?
Well, right now, so for the Europeans, one of the things we've looked at in the past is for a lot of those countries, they're not as impacted sometimes much for the exchange rates as some other countries. So we're looking at the recovery for the Europeans to be fairly strong. I think next year or so, there's a lot of question marks. It's about the issue about Ukraine. And we were talking about earlier, one of the things we were looking at was, what's the weather going to be like, you know, in Europe this year? And everyone was predicting a really, really cold winter, which was then going to cause a recession, and no one's going to have any money, no one's going to travel. And Adam was talking about how it looks like it's probably not happening. But we're seeing the recovery, we think, in Europe to be in the 2024, 2025 period. So I think we're likely a little more bullish on the Europeans and Canada and Mexico than other areas of the world.
And I just want to point out, I don't know if you noticed, looking at the NTTO forecast slide for Europe, the 2023 highest bar was Netherlands, and I was just like, yes, I called that one, even though they won't actually make it to 2019 levels until 2024. But yeah, it looked, as far as the NTTO forecast, that they're leading the recovery. Any additional last question? Whoever's lucky enough to grab the mic.
Thanks. Adam's presentation, he must have said it half a dozen times, high income, high income, high income. And the recovery is going to be different for the international perspective, certainly because of the high income. When you look at those markets, when you're looking at those general pop questions and general travel abroad, you're asking the whole population. And so, when you look at this recovery, you really have to separate those two things, I think, of those that are able to come. Same thing with the visa issues. There's a lot of folks that already have their visas, and those are the folks with wealth. Those are the folks that are going to come no matter what, once it opens up, once they feel free to come. It's the first-time travelers and those destinations that go after first-time travelers that is going to be an interesting, different forecast than the general forecast. I just wondered if you guys had thoughts on that, especially for Brand USA. Are you segmenting differently in that way?
For example, if you look at NTTO's profiles, there is a question that says first-timers to the US, right? And historically, for those markets, that first-timer, for example, were like 20%. During the pandemic, we lost kind of like 10 percentage points in that. That is where you're going to be feeling that visa issues. It's to recover that. But we are looking at the wealthy piece of the component, as everyone else. It's no surprise that those are the ones that are going to have the means, and they have already the accessibility to do so. For the recovery and that slow pace is those that are not necessarily on that big bucket or the bucket of the wealth. Yes, we're doing that.
The other thing I highlight, just to important for everyone to monitor, is that everyone should know that the State Department does release visa wait times on a weekly basis for every place in the world. And it has been coming down. It's still high, but I think it was, let's say, with the median number of days may have been, in November, may have been in the 60s, and maybe it's down into the 50s now. It is coming down, and we actually have been meeting with the State Department. We meet with them once a month on this issue, and they understand what the issue is, and they are putting forth efforts to expand their consular officers to address this problem, because they hear it from a number of areas, and so it's from a number of interested parties. And so they're working diligently to try to backfill all of these positions that were let go during the pandemic. But that problem, even if they work as hard as they can on it, is not going to get solved overnight. And it's probably going to extend into 2023.
Okay, I have to jump in really, really fast because I know they want us to wrap up. But David, you made my dad 11 days saying that the land characteristics for Canadian travelers is coming back. I just want to know when, please.
Well, I got to talk with Scott and Skip over there because their words were good. But I think my assumption is in the first half of this year. I don't want to put you guys on the spot, but something like that. So we're very excited about that. The next hurdle is Mexico. Once we get characteristics of Mexican land, then we will have characteristics for everybody. That might be a 2024 endeavor.
Okay, let's thank our speakers.